One issue remains at the center of the women's rights debate in the US: abortion. And while this protest was at the national level, there is a new local flashpoint in Arkansas. The latest fight is over a proposed amendment to the law governing the medical procedure. Pro-abortion rights groups say the amendment means women cannot get rid of unwanted pregnancies without the consent of the father, even if they are rape victims, and that it legally complicates procedures, effectively making it impossible for women to have abortions in Arkansas. The American Civil Liberties Union has filed a case challenging the law in the district court of the state. The Guttmacher Institute, which focuses on reproductive health research, says it's just the latest law in Republican-led efforts to curb abortion rights. According to the institute, legislators have passed 300 restrictions on abortion across the US since 2010. As of 2016, 22 states have 6 or more restrictions, marking them as hostile to abortion rights. In 2000, Arkansas had 3 restrictions, marking it as less restrictive. But as of 2017, it's risen to extremely hostile with 10 restrictions. Kim Hammer, the Republican state representative sponsoring the bill, says it's intended to protect the aborted fetus from being disposed of as medical waste. But pro-abortion rights activists don't buy that. Shoaib Hassan, the Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined now from Washington, D.C. by Renee Bracey-Sherman. She's a spokeswoman for the National Network of Abortion Funds, which fights barriers to abortion access. And from Fort Lauderdale, Lauren Cooley, an editor at Red Alert Politics and also former staffer at the Susan B. Anthony List, which campaigns against abortion. Thanks, both of you, for joining us. Looking forward to this discussion. Renee, let me begin with you first. What do you think of Arkansas's new law?
Well, thank you so much for having me. You know, I think that this law is just another opportunity that the government is trying to make abortion even more inaccessible and ban it outright here in the United States. We have seen thousands and thousands of anti-abortion restrictions keeping us from being able to access basic health care. You know, those of us who've had abortions, we don't need the government telling us who we need to get permission from to have this medical procedure. So the government is saying that it's regulating communication between families. When we have abortions, we are talking to the people in our lives, our loved ones, our families, our partners, to make this decision. And sometimes we're just making it ourselves. The government should not be telling us that we have to talk to certain people, particularly if it is someone that has raped us. That is just an egregious move by the government to kind of keep us from being able to access basic healthcare, abortion care.
Okay, so Lauren, firstly, tell me why you disagree with Renee, and tell me if you think maybe the law's made a mistake by not being clear enough, and there is some space for interpretation that a rapist has to give permission for an abortion. Go ahead, Lauren.
Sure. So I think there were 2 main intentions for this legislation. The first was respect for life, right? So when someone has an abortion, before this legislation was put in place, my understanding is that the fetus could be pretty much dumped out in the trash with all the rest of the medical waste. And so for people like myself who believe that unborn children are still a very precious and valuable life, this legislation was intended for the body of the fetus to be disposed of in a more respectful manner. And then the second intention was that we give some respect and value to paternal rights. And so a lot of times we have this discussion about abortion like it's just between the mother and the child, but in reality, when anyone dies, that impacts more than just the mother, and that includes you know, an unborn child. And so the idea was to give paternal rights some say to the father of a child that might be aborted. And so The point in this is that every time that you create legislation, there's always going to be a loophole, or there's always going to be something that comes out in the wash that wasn't the main intention or wasn't even thought of. And I think that's where you get to this idea that you may have to consult your rapist to get an abortion. I think that's absurd. I don't think anyone would ever intend for that to be the main point of the law or the point of the law whatsoever. And so I think that's something we can discuss, and it's something that definitely needs to be looked at, because we need to have compassion for people who are considering abortion, especially when it comes to a case of rape. And so that's, to me, I think the important thing to understand is that the intention of the legislation was not to protect rapists. In fact, it was actually to give respect to unborn life and to fathers.
Okay, so Renee, both of you are coming at this from different perspectives. Do you agree with Lauren that perhaps the intention of the law didn't quite match with some of the potential ramifications and problems down the line?
No, the intention of the law matched exactly with it, and it is to keep people from being able to access abortion care. When I had an abortion at 19, I talked about it with my partner, and I don't believe that the government should have to kind of be part of that conversation. That is for us to make that decision. The government should not be legislating who we decide health care with. All of these restrictions, all they are designed to do is to keep people from being able to access health care. Those of us who've had abortions, 95% of us do not regret our decision. We come into the decision fully understanding what we're doing and that this is actually the best decision for us. Mm-hmm. The majority of people who are having abortions are already parents, so they know what it's like to be a parent and have decided that at that time that they don't want to grow their family. And so at what point are we going to actually trust women? What point are we going to trust people who are having abortions to make the best decisions for themselves and for their families? Right. I think I know my situation best and not the government.
Okay, yeah. I want to draw to your attention something that was said by the Center for Reproductive Rights very recently. Lauren, I want to ask you about this because they said, with this package of laws, we're definitely seeing a new creative and especially cruel attempt by Arkansas to make abortion more difficult, if not impossible, for women to access and to stigmatize and demean them in the meantime. So again and again, we're hearing, Lauren, that it's not so much about the law itself or the minutiae of the details of the law, whereas they do actually have problems with the law itself, but they see it as a package. They see it as a kind of, as an ever-shrinking space of women's rights, state by state, and it's particularly bad in a place like Arkansas. That's how they see it. Lauren, tell me why you disagree with that.
Well, I think the number one thing is this health care, or is this a discussion about life, right? And so, first of all, I don't think this is healthcare, right? This is making a decision that you're going to terminate a human life. You're going to make a decision and an action that is going to deter someone from being born and being able to live.
Put forward by a doctor.
No,
abortion
it's not
healthcare.
And
I've had
abortion
one.
is not healthcare.
Saw the nurses and the doctors that are there. It is healthcare.
Just because it is a medical procedure does not mean that it is.
You may
healthcare,
disagree with
because
it.
Unless a woman is dealing with something.
Just a second, Renee. Let Lauren finish her sentence.
Unless a woman is dealing with something where it's a threat on her life, unless a woman's dealing with something where having a fetus is a threat on her life and it's actually a medical procedure to save the mother's life, then it really isn't healthcare. And I think this is a rhetorical talking point that the left often uses. And so to say that this is a restriction on abortion, like I said, first of all, it's respect for the unborn life. It's respect for fathers who are basically involved in this situation. And so when you say it's not the role of the government, I'm sorry, but the role of the government is to protect life. And so if you want to have an abortion, then you should be able to go and talk to your partner about it. You said that you did that, but that doesn't mean that everyone is. And so to me, it makes complete sense to say that the father of an unborn child should be able to have some type of say in what's going on.
And for me, it's really interesting seeing the cultural fault lines at play here. We talk about left, right, and usually, especially in the United States, on the left, they're saying we want more government. On the right, we're saying we want less government. On this discussion, for me as an outsider, as the man from the moon, the roles seem to be inversed in some way. But Renee, let me ask you, do you have any sympathy for the fact that maybe in a place like Arkansas, in a democracy, the vast majority of people might want things that are very different to what you want and might see the situation very differently when it comes to, whereas you say you're pro-choice, they say they're pro-life, you're essentially pro-abortion and they're anti-abortion. Do you accept that they need to have their voices heard?
So I'm actually from the Midwestern part of the United States, the heartland of the United States, as are many Americans, and actually the majority of Americans do support access to abortion. It's not about whether or not you would have an abortion yourself. It's about whether you'd stand in the way of someone else having one. And so we want to make sure that everyone is able to make that decision to become a parent or to grow their family without government standing in the way. You know, if they would like to continue the pregnancy, I totally support them. And I want to make sure that we have the safety net programs that are there. We have our government that is cutting healthcare right now, cutting Medicaid, which is healthcare for poor families. So where is the culture in life in that? I have so many questions for my colleague about, you know, how are we standing up to make sure that low-income families are able to access food? How are we making sure that, you know, they aren't being shot down in the street by police? Like, these are things that families are dealing with every single day, right. And that is not really the culture of life in the United States.
Okay, so ask her directly, right? Okay, I'll pose that. Lauren, so Renee's saying if the government really wants to protect life, those should be the priorities, not this. Lauren?
I think the government does a lot to protect a culture of life outside of the womb. And that's not, first of all, that's not the discussion that we're having. I'm happy to have it, but I just want to point out that's another rhetorical point to say, well, yes, it is a termination of life when you have an abortion, but let's talk about how people who want to protect life in the womb don't care about life once it's born. Well, first of all, that's a ridiculous claim. Conservatives and people who are pro-life actually are some of the most largest charitable givers. They give to charity sometimes 50% more than liberals do. And so if you want to talk about this left-right paradigm, the right believes in less government in fiscal areas, and so that people...
Where'd you get the 50% from?
Where did I get the 50% from? There's several different surveys, especially general census surveys that have come out throughout the years. I actually wrote an op-ed about this about a week ago on Red Alert Politics, where people can dive into the statistics there. But in many different cases, the right is actually doing more charitable giving of their own money, and the left decides that it's the government's job to do the charitable work. And so it's not necessarily to say that the left is more compassionate or the right is more compassionate. So when you're talking about life outside of the womb, to me, it's a very cheap shot to say that people who are pro-life don't care about others once somebody is born. In fact, that's the whole purpose of, back to what we were talking about, this legislation was for quality of life, respect of life, and then to give better rights to parents, especially paternal rights.
Even, and the point these others are making again, even rapists, because the law doesn't exclude them. Nevertheless, Lauren, last year the Supreme Court struck down something that was, very anti-abortion. It was seen as a victory for pro-abortion advocates in the United States. What Arkansas is doing right now, 2017 is very different to 2016. What Arkansas is doing right now, would you like to see replicated at the federal level? Do you want to see more of this across the country?
Well, I mean, I think there are definitely things that need to be fixed with this legislation. I came out right at the beginning and said, of course, we don't want to be empowering rapists in any way, shape, or form, and we need to have the utmost sympathy for people who are victims of rape. So I think there's definitely some flaws in the way that the Arkansas laws is being applied, right? If you can fix those bugs in the issue, yeah, I definitely am for respecting life when it comes to the way that if there is an abortion that takes place, respecting the way that the fetus is disposed of. I don't think it's medical waste. I don't think that it's garbage or trash. It's a human being, and it's a life that we need to mourn. So I don't see why that's something that's so controversial. Okay,
this is something you mentioned twice, so let me get Renee to address this idea that fetuses are sort of thrown away as garbage and trash. Lauren said it twice, so Renee, you were shaking your head each time she said it, so why don't you respond to that?
I mean, there's just so much misinformation. I'm not really sure to where to begin there. But I've been to abortion clinics. I've had an abortion. That's actually not how it's done. But what I really actually want to get back to is the fact that, you know, reproductive justice activists and pro-choice activists are trying to ensure that everyone is able to raise the families that they want and that they are able to put forward. So we're fighting to make sure that folks have access to the minimum wage.
Even if that means getting rid of life that is unwanted.
I'm sorry. We are trying to make sure that everyone is able to earn living wages so that they are able to raise these families that they have. We are trying to make sure that everyone has access to health care. That's why we're trying to save the Affordable Care Act, which is making sure that millions of people, particularly those who are on Medicaid, are able to access health care. You know, we're fighting to make sure that all families are able to thrive. And some people will decide that abortion is the best decision for them when they're having a pregnancy. Some will continue their pregnancies.
Yep.
We want to make sure that everyone is able to make that decision without government intrusion and without having to leave the state to access health care.
Certainly. Let me ask you again, and it's similar to what I asked Lauren. This is what's happening in Arkansas. We've used it as our launching point to discuss something far broader. Renee, what do you think is happening at the federal level? Do you think that what Arkansas is doing is something that is going to be replicated elsewhere? Is that the national trend?
Oh, absolutely. We've seen thousands of anti-abortion restrictions sweep the nation. Several states are trying to ban abortion at 6 weeks before people even know that they're pregnant. And so we're seeing that they're trying to pass these laws in the states and then kind of sweep across the nation and try to basically undermine the right to an abortion, and I'm sure it will come to Congress at some point. They're patently unconstitutional, and so we're hoping that the courts will see it that way and will make sure that we are able to access abortion care without all of the barriers that already exist.
Okay, Lauren's shaking her head as well. Lauren, tell us what's behind that head shake.
Well, I mean, the thing that you said is that a lot of people are looking to see abortion banned at 6 weeks, but you don't mention that at 6 weeks, that's when a heartbeat starts in a fetus. That's when you see the first signs of human life. And so it's not like this is just some random number of weeks that's being thrown out. There's scientific proof behind when a heartbeat starts, and that's at 6 weeks. And the other thing is the reason that abortion laws are becoming more strict is actually because more and more young people are becoming pro-life. In fact, we have the most pro-life generation in American history with millennials, believe it or not. And I think that comes down to social media and the digital age that we live in. I can't scroll through my Facebook news feed without seeing a sonogram or a picture of an infant or finding out that a friend is pregnant. And so it becomes more real for a lot more people because of that.
Okay, so Renee, more young people are against you. They don't agree with you, according to Lauren. Final word from you, Renee.
Again, that's not true. Again, that's not true. You know, support for abortion has actually stayed steady for many decades. The majority of people, 7 in 10 Americans, support access to abortion. Everyone loves someone who has had an abortion, and so they just need to recognize that, you know, politicians are actually harming the people that they love when they're seeking health care.
Well, Renee Bracey-Sherman and Lauren Cooley, I'm really happy that we had 2 young women on the program who disagree very deeply on the fundamentals, but we were able to cover a lot of ground, and especially from this outside perspective. I thank you both for allowing me to probe and prod as we looked at this very divisive issue in the United States. Renee Bracey-Sherman and Lauren Cooley, thank you very much for joining us.